Welcome back to Natural 2, our D&D and tabletop role-playing talk show. I am Nathan, and my co-host, as always, is James. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit more loose, not so much advice, but kind of throwing the ball back and forth of other settings or universes or places to play around in as far as tabletop role-playing is concerned. Obviously, we're very entrenched in the kind of D&D atmosphere, but I think every person that has played a system for a long period of time has always had that itch or that desire to try something else out or play around with a different concept that they can't in their current system. So we're just going to shoot the shit about that today and see what comes of it. But you have anything off the top of your head, sir?
Not to put too fine a point on it, but if you've ever thought about exploring a new setting, just making a change, seeing what it feels like to shake things up. This seems 2023 seems to be the year to do that.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say about that for right
You
now.
certainly wouldn't be alone. Yeah, it's the best way to put it.
So I do have something. I mentioned it in our I think very previous video.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, again, to be clear, I want to clarify, actually, now that I think about it. So I think we can agree that D&D, as well as arguably most, or at least half of the tabletop RPG hobby, is medieval fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty broad category, but it conjures all the same images of swords, sorcery, and hamlets, villages with straw thatched roofs, or horse-drawn carts, things like that. Knights, wizards, all of those sorts of things. And what I was thinking about recently is other settings or other backgrounds, backdrops, other kinds of worlds that I would like to play in again, or in some cases for the first time, that I wish I had 48 hours in a day and 12 days in a week.
And 7 clones of yourself.
Yeah, in order to really explore all of these ideas. That's one of the fun things and tragic things about the hobby, is that you're never going to be finished. You can't do everything. You won't do everything. But that is, it's more infinite than our own Earth, our own planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's just some stream of consciousness there, so bear with me. Anyway, that little diatribe is fitting for the first setting that I would love to explore, and maybe top of the list for if I was going to start a new game tonight, what I would be starting it in. And that is science fiction, and more specifically, Star Trek. There is an official Star Trek tabletop role-playing system that is live. It is, there are a lot of systems, by the way, that are basically dead. It's like abandonware.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't good things in there that, you could still pick those up and have fun in. I mean, first and second and third edition of D&D are dead systems, but only in the sense that there is no new official content anymore. There's no Player's Handbook 3 coming for any of those, but I digress. The point is that the Star Trek system is current. It is a contemporary with 5e and Fate and Savage Worlds and some of these others. They've just released some splat books for that system. But I like the idea of playing in a sci-fi setting someday just because of the wildly different flavor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like medieval fantasy. I will always want to play medieval fantasy, but if you eat the same thing month after month, then you start to think like, man, I want something weird. I want something totally different. And I feel like it gives you room. It gives you room to do whatever you want, even more so than a medieval fantasy setting, because you can black box anything. You can be on a totally different planet in a different star system. In fact, you probably encouraged to be next week. And there's something about not having to think about, like, something that you've talked about in our previous campaign is what to do about traveling
Mm-hmm.
and not wanting to make travel feel cheap. Uh, but at the same time sort of struggling with it. And in a sci-fi setting generally, and Star Trek specifically, the timescales that you're dealing with are uh be on the other side of the planet in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think about how you got there. Don't worry about having to come up with random encounters for the trip. That would be absurd. You're just
Mm-hmm.
there. You know, you're moving on to the next thing. So unless you're doing some space opera epic where you're literally crossing the galaxy, that's just not on your plate in that case.
But I'm not really familiar with Star Trek. I don't watch any of the shows, and I know that's a cardinal sin, and I'll be roasted on the internet for it. But what is, I guess, like besides the generic sci-fi appeal, what's the appeal of the Star Trek universe as far as like how it would translate to a tabletop role-playing game? Like, I know that the general show is a like this week on the Enterprise we're doing XYZ, so that flavor would kind of fit really well with the kind of weekly role-playing game thing. But yeah, is there like other things that you would see fitting really well?
I'm really glad that you asked that. You're making my segment better by the minute. Um, I can't believe that I didn't think to say this myself. So one of the things that makes Star Trek, at least in my opinion, is that it has always been an ensemble. You know, everybody knows, oh, Captain Kirk, Captain Picard, whatever. But really, all of those shows were about the entire crew and uh, people people on a crew, the bridge crew working as a team. They have their specialties. They have um, respect for each other. There's a built-in assumption that if you're in Starfleet, if you're a Starfleet officer, you are going to work together. You're going to support each other. You're going to help each other, and you're going to do what's best for the mission. And there's always exceptions. There wouldn't be any drama if everything were always perfect. In fact, that was something that the people creating Star Trek TV shows sort of struggled with from time to time. But this isn't a show about Star Trek. We'll save that. But
Thank God.
uh, point being, yeah, you better smile when you say that. Uh, it is core to the concept that it is a team of passionate professionals that are working together. There's no meeting in a tavern in Star Trek. It's assumed from the first minute, you know, from the opening moments of your story, practically. So that is something that works really well. Also, core to the spirit of Star Trek is dialogue. So if you're looking for a setting or a concept that gives you a reason for all that talking and all that role play, most Star Trek, with some exceptions, has been about ask questions first and shoot if you have to, which would also be an interesting change of pace from monster slaying.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be the biggest change that I would see is Star Trek, as far as I'm aware, again, is centers more around like the exploration of the world and the people and different cultures and planets and all that kind of thing, versus like, oh, we're going to the cave to kill the dragon to save the princess. Like, obviously, it's a bit of a simplicity. That's not how you say that. A dumbing down, yeah, simplification of D&D or standard fantasy, but there's like a generally different direction or drive or goal, which would be interesting, and I think would fit a lot more groups better than probably the game they might be playing. Like, that's part of the conversation. I think
the tone is totally different, and also it is basically hopeful and optimistic. That's one of the other things that is good about the franchise that sort of sets it apart from almost everything else that is out there, is that it's about having hope for the future. It's about, believing in something, having ideals. And I think that there's been a lot of insightful commentary on how D&D in particular is a post-apocalyptic setting. And it's just not something that we shine a light on, really. But there are lost civilizations and ruins everywhere, and they had to come from somewhere. So it's in a lot of ways a post-apocalyptic setting. It's a dangerous setting. It's a setting where ordinary people are, CR -0 and just worthless in a lot of ways. Like, the only thing that gives a regular person meaning in a D&D game is the meaning that you assign them and create for them. So, long story short, before I continue to ramble any more aimlessly, the tone is very different, potentially.
Yeah. The sci-fi system that I've always had curiosity in. I'm a big fan of Seth Skorosowski. I know I butchered that one. But he does a lot of, like, I don't want to say obscure TTRPG reviews, but he does like old school D&D adventures, and Traveler is a big system, which is the one that I'm kind of putting forward. He also does it's like Dark of the Occult or something like that. But he does it like a good splattering, and Traveler always got my attention because it is, I don't want to say it's like generic sci-fi, but it's very approachable sci-fi. There is lore that isn't like thousands of eons of this and that, and this strange race you've never heard of that you have to try and have some concept of. It's very approachable, and it's a lighter system as far as I'm aware. If you're using D&D as a standard, which I think most people do, it's a little bit less rules dense, which is always something that kind of appeals to me. I've never been one who enjoys sitting down and grinding through combat and, cross-referencing this rule with that rule, but then it got re-mentioned in another book and got mentioned a different way there, and, so on and so forth. Like, one of the things I wanted to slip in during this conversation at some point is I think I would much prefer, like, really rules-light systems, almost like index card systems or, like, coin flip systems. Like, I could really do a lot with just some, like, general direction, but I know there's a big, I don't want to say split, but there's a spectrum in TTRPG where it's like, I need, a 400-page manual about how this works in this scenario, and this works in that scenario, and there's people that are like, literally give me a coin flip and we'll just roll with whatever the hell the result is. But Traveler is cool. I really wanted to try playing Traveler. I've watched like live plays of it before, and it seemed interesting. The character creation is one of the coolest things I've seen, because you randomly build it with the group as your first session. Like you're sitting there, having input on other people's characters. Like, oh, I roll like she failed out of academy 3 times, but she's in love with some prominent NPC. And so you're sitting there crafting the story with everyone else's input, and you get a lot of cool creativity from that. And since it isn't a sci-fi universe, there's a ton of, as you said before, like variation that you can do, or like wild things you can include. So that would be a system that I would love to play in, but I think it's so different from what like D&D's kind of standard is. It'd be really hard to take the main group that we have and have them try that for a little bit.
The other nice thing about a sci-fi setting is that potentially you don't have to worry about any lore at all.
Mm-hmm.
Your game world can be the ship that you start on. And Star Trek was this way early on, like, the first series and Next Gen and the movies, where it's just the ship and who's on the ship.
Yeah, and the Federation, whatever that means when they get around to it.
When you need somebody from the Federation to come throw their weight around, they can show up on the ship, and you worry about them then. But until then, you just have the crew on that ship to worry about, and then whatever the problem is that week. So that you could hit the ground running in a very real way. So there's a lot to recommend, now that we're talking about it. Gosh, I wish we could do it right now.
I think the appeal that sci-fi has to me is, it's weird to say that it's more grounded than like a D&D game typically is, but I think that's the case, or at least how I'm picturing it. The issue I've always run into with D&D, especially 5th edition, is everyone tries to take this one system and apply it to a huge variety of themes and games and settings and universes. And while that's nice, and it does create this like tapestry of stuff you can pull from, you can't really have a gritty game if you are playing the 5e rules, because there are certain spells and mechanics and like meta knowledge that the characters are bringing from the system that make it almost impossible to play like a very, very, granular survival game for an extended period of time. So while we mentioned that like medieval fantasy is certainly oversaturated as far as the TTRPG community is concerned, I would love, I've talked about it before, I've mentioned it to you a million times, I would love to play like a really down-to-earth, like low fantasy, if any fantasy, like medieval adventuring game. Like you're a mercenary group that is, traveling from town to town, scraping by, having to fight off fucking festering wounds and shit. Like, oh, the cool things you could do with that, the stories that could be told if you couldn't just heal wounds and keep fucking going. But that would be another system or, universe or setting that I would love to get into, is like some really gritty, and not necessarily dark, but just like, I don't know, gritty is the best term for it. That, I don't know, there's a lot of meat there that I've never been able to fully enjoy, and I would love to do so.
Maybe even just like a near historical, historical medieval setting that may not have any magic, or the magic is more like what we see in some of the older stories or legends, or like King Arthur kind of thing, where it's implied but not, you don't really know that anybody ever cast a spell.
Yeah, no one's sitting there hurling fucking fireballs, but like sometimes a woman will appear out of the water and, give some magical gift or something. Like it's a very different expectation.
And this is a special sword. What's special about it? It's just special, man. Who knows? Maybe you'll find out, maybe you won't. The last thing I'll say about a sci-fi setting, before we move on, is I really enjoy looking at art. I like art for inspiration. I like art for setting a scene or a tone. I and especially for characters. Um, I if I'm running a game and an NPC is gonna have more than like 2 sentences to say, I'm probably gonna go find some kind of artwork that can be representative of them. And gosh, it would be nice to look at something different. In a sci-fi campaign, it would be nice to see all this wildly different art, because you do reach a point when it comes to fantasy art where it's like, I have seen that dwarf 1,000 times. I have seen
some
that
quirky female in an alchemy shop. How original.
yeah, or this cloaked and hooded rogue, or this elven archer. Like, gosh, I've just seen it. And so just, yeah, show me a spaceship. Show me some kind of cool power armor. Like, ready for a palate cleanser. That's all.
Oh man, like a Fallout TTRPG would be fun. Like not like as zany as Fallout, but that could be interesting.
Yeah. I just, as a shout out here, I played 2 previous campaigns, 2 previous games and tables that I played in that were rather long running. First was basically a space opera or a space adventure that was strongly inspired by Firefly and X-Men. It's kind of like a mashup of Firefly and X-Men.
Okay.
It was great. I mean, it was really sick. And we ran it on, I believe it was like either a modified or just like 1 page out of the rule book of a Marvel superheroes tabletop system. I need to look it up sometime and find out exactly what it is and the name of it and who made it. Because it was kind of interesting. What I remember is that your abilities were you rolled percentile dice for your actions, and your abilities were on a scale, so that, if you were strong, if you were medium strong, then you might need to roll an 85 or a 90 in order to have a great success at what you were attempting. But if you were like Incredible Hulk strong, then if you roll above a 30, you're going to get it. So it's basically like it's how likely is it that you're going to be successful, and to what degree? Because there were also the scale was split into like 6 different colors, and so you could sort of succeed, or you could really succeed, or you could kind of fail, or you could super duper fail. I don't know. I'll look it up. We'll talk about it maybe sometime. But anything else, like another setting from you?
There's one that I talked to you very briefly about. I don't even know if you remember it. It was when we were getting together to do our in-person game back in August. I found this, like, it was like a 2 or 3 page PDF of a 1920s Prohibition era TTRPG about like being like bootleggers and moonshine runners and stuff. And
I remember.
Man, I don't know what it is about it. Like I've always been a fan of like mafia-esque era kind of stuff, whether it's like the Italian mob being dumpster men, or the prohibition gangs that kind of cropped up. Like, I don't know, the suits, the Tommy guns, the cigars, the stupid fucking Boston accents. I don't know. It does it for me. And so I would find that so fun. And it wasn't a super deep system, but it was all about like prepping for a run, figuring out like what resources you might have at your disposal, doing the run and seeing what shenanigans ensue, and then building your gang up as you go. And it even had like a system for like how infamous you were and what the likelihood of you being arrested was and how expensive your bail would be, and like weird shit like that could really be some cool like storytelling elements. And I would love to run that. And that's not quite a modern setting, but it's certainly more modern and recognizable than a fantasy setting is. So that would be kind of cool to play around with, because I don't think I would enjoy playing in a TTRPG where phones exist. I've heard this like discussion online a lot of the time of like it's really difficult to run a like nowadays, RPG game because you do like a mystery whatever and you can just Google it or smartphone it or Alexa or, some stupid like expectation in the world kind of breaks a lot of the expectations that you have.
My character asks Siri like
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that before.
Yeah, it's a big thing. I've like read articles and read posts about it and shit. But yeah, back in 1920s, technology was still not as, inclusive as it is now. So it would still, you'd have a lot of freedom there to kind of have these moments of not being connected to everything. But that would be really cool. I would love to run, I don't want to say like a super lengthy campaign in that, but it would be cool to play around with and get into because it's something I've never done before. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think most people would have fun with it. I do imagine it would be hard to sell a lengthy campaign for it because it only has so much you can really do in it. But yeah, I would love that. That'd be so much fun.
It's interesting that you say that because the next setting on my list is modern.
Yeah.
Or like modern with a fantastic spin. I think Vampire the Masquerade would fall in this category because it's basically a modern setting with a fantastical arc. But a superhero game would potentially be fun. I have sometimes wondered what it would be like to do a Power Rangers tabletop.
Okay.
Like, so I've sincerely kind of fantasized about like playing the stupid theme music at the beginning of a game, and your character is just starts with the all right, pick a color and a dinosaur, and we'll go from there. Like, there's something about that just sounds really fun to me. And there's two main things that draw me to this kind of setting. And that's number one, I have this weird fascination. I think that it would be fun for some reason if your world map were just Google Maps. There's something about that just seems neat. Like, you pick a city and just, all right, everybody pull it up on Google Maps and tell me where you're going. Or just the ease with which that you could find pictures of the places that the characters are.
Literally Google Street View.
Yeah. It's I need a warehouse, or I need a mansion, or I need whatever, a pizza restaurant. Like, that'd be the simplest thing in the world. And if you're using Google Street View, you don't even really have to worry about, like, you don't need AI art. Just go outside and take a picture. Drive downtown and point your camera phone at the sidewalk and base your session that night on whatever you get. The second thing that I sort of like about this is that it's immediately and naturally relatable. You don't have to, you don't have to bend over backwards to try to describe what something looks like. You don't have to work as hard because everybody understands. They can form that picture in their mind very naturally. Because we live it. You don't have to worry.
References would be so much easier. Like, even in like D&D, sometimes you have to do some stretching.
The references, the characterization, the voices, the accents, whatever. It's all relatable. It's all grounded, I think is the word that you used earlier in the video. And there's something about being able to just get right to the plot. You can just say, like, guess what? You're chasing the serial killer into a strip club. You don't need to say anything else. You know, maybe you
Mhm.
describe the cheesy music or the dim lights, but you're done. Everybody knows that now.
Mm.
You know, they may have watched a scene in a TV show that took place in a very similar set earlier that week.
I
So
think
it's
Dimension 20 is running a game in a modern setting right now. And it's really interesting because you can't just go, oh, there's a construction crew over there. And everyone instantly has that in like their minds. Like, even though he goes to the thing of like, one's wearing a Carhartt jacket and one has like a really chipped up white, construction helmet. Like, you know what that looks like before he begins explaining it. So, yeah, there's a lot of benefit there.
there's something just fast, like kind of sleek and streamlined about being able to do that. And it also makes improvisation very easy,
Hmm.
um, relatively speaking. So yeah, some kind of modern setting.
I think I would need modern with like a twist, like what you mentioned earlier, is like some sort of fantasy element in it. I should look it up, but I think it is called Dark of the Occult. It's one of the like kind of more obscure systems, and it's all about like horror and it's almost kind of like the story of the Matrix, where like these old gods have like tricked us into believing that our normal day to day is what it is, but really they're like siphoning off of our power and shit. And so the whole purpose of the game is your character is like pulling back the veil that they have put on like over your eyes and seeing. There's a lot of cool shit, and I watched a bunch of videos on it. And so that would be cool because you could play off of the normal everyday life of someone of like getting up in your shitty apartment and your laundry's on the floor and your alarm clock is an hour off because you didn't switch it for daylight saving time, and you trudge over to the bathroom and there's like soap scum in your sink. Like, you could really lean into that, and then all of a sudden, there's an extra hand growing out of your eye, and it's like, ah, well, here's where the fun begins. So
Uh, this I'll give you another one of my fantasies that's associated with this setting. Um, I I've imagined, and anybody out there, take this, use it, tell me how it goes. Running a mystery game that is a modern setting where the players don't know what kind of game it is, don't know what they're in for, so obviously there'd be a lot of trust involved, but um a a fight breaks out and one of the characters is killed, and then takes a deep breath and their eyes open back up and they're alive again after a few minutes, and then the Highlander song plays. I also don't know why I think Highlander would make a good setting for a tabletop RPG, but I do.
you can certainly make it work.
And it would be fun to tackle. Like, it's another way of handling how do you deal with a party that can't die
Hmm.
except for very specific circumstances. You don't have to worry about like healing spells and resurrection and all that for a totally different reason, because it doesn't matter because they can't die. So
There,
your stakes have to change. Your problems have to be different.
there would be a really fun Groundhog's Day game. I could totally see it. Where like the party, every time they fail or die, they wake up in the same spot, go through the same day, and they just slowly make it further and further. Like, that could be really fun.
So that's my weird idea about that.
Oh, yeah.
The last setting for me that I think it would be super fun to play in is Western.
Mm. Hmm.
The style, having a good reason to use a dumb Southern accent, uh, the the way that it also slots in really nicely because it's got actually a lot of things in common with medieval fantasy.
Hmm.
The lawlessness, the lack of a strong central authority, so it kind of makes sense that you can go around doing whatever the hell you want. Might makes a right kind of thing that happens in D&D basically all the time. The wide open, unclaimed territory that seems to exist. The exploration, is still there. Um,
The wacky
there-
characters.
what was that?
The wacky characters.
Oh yeah, you can have some wacky characters. Weird West is a whole uh subgenre of its own. Um, so I think that would be pretty cool. And the system that I'll shout out to is Savage Worlds for this one. Because I actually was my introduction to my wife to tabletop role playing was a Savage Worlds game in which she was going to be the only player, and she was a widow in the Old West, and we were going to run it in Savage Worlds. Um, and Savage Worlds, actually, that company has a supplement that is, I think it might actually be called Weird West, or something like that, or Solomon Kane, something. If you Google that, you'll find it. So they've done some of that work for you if you're interested in that, or their system also would just work really nicely and is pretty light and flexible for gunfighting and kind of a cinematic combat. So yeah, I think a Western would be really dope.
Yeah, there's so many like iconic movies that like immediately come to my head. That would
There
like,
again,
yeah.
yeah, so many touchstones
Mhm.
and so easy to, so much that you can draw on for inspiration and descriptions and ideas. Um, there again, there's just so much. If D&D and medieval fantasy is standing on the shoulders of giants like J.R.R. Tolkien and um the guy who wrote Conan, what's his name?
I don't read, so
I'm sorry. I should know his name. You know what? The power of technology, the power of the internet. Don't edit this out. I want people to know.
okay.
I'm using live studio fact checking here. Robert Howard. Robert Howard. I want to give him his due and not just say the Conan guy. He's the creator of Conan, Robert E. Howard. So if we're standing on their shoulders when we play in our medieval fantasy, then think of all the spaghetti western and Gunsmoke and the Magnificent Seven and the Quick and the Dead. Just there's an basically equal amount of great entertainment out there, and the books. Louis L'Amour is an old author that wrote so many spaghetti western novels, paperbacks, easy reads. Just there's no end to what you could draw on, and it would be really fun to place a table of players in that world and drink whiskey and shoot bottles off a fence and snatch up spunky widows that are defending their ranch from the angry natives, who are probably angry with very good reason, by the way. But again, not that kind of video. Snatch her up onto your horse and run away. Like, rob a freaking train.
Mhm. The one thing that I'm always curious about with more modern settings, like whether this is, back in the 1920s setting or the Western setting or today kind of settings, is I feel like a lot of people that are used to playing D&D struggle to differentiate. I need to speak better today. Their characters when coming to the table, because usually those systems don't have as baked in mechanics, like these incredibly different archetypes to bring, right? Like you can't bring a divination wizard and a dragonborn rogue, like, you know, like you can't come to the table with a completely different person because you're all human beings in a human world with human expectations. And I think what that pushes you towards, as far as like making the game, I don't know, creative or interesting, is the characters themselves then have to have very distinct personalities from one another, because humans, believe it or not, do have a fair bit of variety in them. And I would really like to explore that more and lean on that more, where I think it kind of gets pushed to the back burner with D&D because someone's like, oh, well, you know, I'm not like my other character, I'm an orc this time. It's like, but you do the same thing. Like, you're literally the same person.
That's a really good point. Yeah, how do you distinguish yourself when you can't rely on being a purple succubus lady from the jump to do it for you?
Yeah. So that would be something I would love to actually witness firsthand or deal with or poke around in, because yeah, I don't think it gets enough attention in the normal D&D game.
Well, that's all I've got. Anything else from you?
Well, that's about it. I mean, we probably could go on some rants about how difficult it is to get your group to play another game, but I think most groups or DMs probably understand that. And
that might be a video in the future, you know, yeah, how to sell a new idea to your table.
But the TTRPG community is pretty awesome. There's just so much content in it, and there's so many different places and people and things and like concepts to explore. If you need something, well, we didn't even mention a zombie apocalypse setting. Like, I bet you buttloads that there's tons of people that have that in mind as like their dream concept. There are plenty of systems for that, which I'm sure a lot of people do enjoy. So yeah, there's a lot to do. And
I would put money down. I'd put money down right now that there's a system made for zombie apocalypse specifically.
And I bet you money that there is a third-party book to how to play zombie apocalypse in D&D. And it's like, okay. But yeah, that's about it. Just kind of shooting the shit about a bunch of different ideas that we'll probably never actually get to play, but we can hope and we can dream.
It was a nice discussion anyway. And the Power Rangers RPG is going to be always in the back of my mind.
If we have to do like another round of one-shots or something, I'm gonna prop that up and see if we can make that the thing.
And forget like all the controversy around discussing, you know, forcing people to roleplay at the table or how much you should expect them to do. It is required at this table to declare when it is in fact morphing time.
You have to get up out of your chair and do the pose.
And do the pose. Yes, you do.
Yep.
Not optional. Oh, man. Well, as always, discuss in the comments your settings that you wish you could play, your pet ideas, your weird things that you think would somehow be fun at a table to roll dice. I want to know them. Nathan wants to know them. And while you're down there, like and subscribe. now more than ever. Because a whole planet full of YouTubers cried out in terror and then went silent as we tried to figure out, like, what's this year going to look like for content?
Oh, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, we can't touch on it because we're going to go down the rabbit hole, but it's going to be interesting.
And we probably won't, honestly.
Yeah.
Other people have already done it, and better than
much more qualified individuals, yeah.
But anyway, for the lighter side, at least for the time being, keep it here. Come back here next week.
Have a good one.